Okay, welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about social media interactions, or social media interactions and misinformation. Here is Barb, and she's going to tell you all about this today.
Hi guys, happy to be here again. This is the last part of the social media series. So just to go over what we talked about before. So in part one, we talked about the basics of social media. So that was the importance of social media, the different types, let's compare. So we compared the different types, cross media posts, key elements of a social media post. And then we also talked about websites, which technically isn't social media, but it also is, and it's an important tool for FRC teams. In part two, we talked about tools for social media. So we talked about the concept of ideal time, why are tools important. We went over hosting multiple links, post schedulers, some hashtag tips, built-in analytics, and then some additional tools. And then last week we talked about Adobe Spark and Photopea. So with that, we talked about the difference between graphics and pictures, the do's and don'ts of creating graphics, why is editing images important, editing tools, Adobe products specifically, and then also some common alternatives to Adobe products. So what are we going to talk about today? Today we are going to talk about social media, the difference between an interaction and an engagement. We're going to talk a little bit about what reposting is, tagging, some tips, what is misinformation, how does that apply to FRC, research for social media, and then most importantly, social media privacy. So to start us off, we're going to talk a little bit about those social media interactions. So first off, social media, what is an interaction versus engagement? So what's the difference exactly? One boosts your engagement and then the other boosts their engagement, essentially. So an interaction is when you're reposting their content. So again, that's the Twitter, quote retweeting, reposting your story, which we're going to go over a little bit, and taking accounts. So that is something that is going to boost both your engagement and their engagement, primarily your engagement though. And then there's engagement, which is what we call liking a post or commenting on a post, saving the post, and all that jazz. So engagement is what our goal is when we create any post. It's just the difference between what is engagement for us and what is engagement for them. It's a little confusing, but I'm going to go over some interactions in a moment, which should help clear that up. So reposting, how does it actually benefit you? So reposting gives you free content. It allows you the benefit of engaging with your audience, so getting that engagement, but it's with minimal effort. So you don't actually have to come up with content yourself. You can just repost someone else's. And then it's also an easy way to connect with other accounts. So you could also be reposting you could be boosting their initiatives or sharing their successes. And then that creates that friendship or relationship in which they could do the same for you. They could reciprocate by constantly either liking and giving you that engagement or just reposting your account, sharing in their stories and all that stuff. So what does it look like? What does reposting look like? So reposting on Twitter looks like retweeting or quote tweeting. So there's a little bit of a difference. I believe I've talked about it a little bit before, but this is a super simple way to connect. So quote retweeting also allows you to add your own content on top of theirs. So adding that congratulations if you're boosting or sharing their success or anything like that. So reposting on Facebook is as simple as clicking that share button. It's sharing those posts. So this is when you have those posts that are content is similar to what you would normally post, and it helps spread the word without you putting in that effort to create that medium. So for example, here you can think about those First Canada updates. The First Canada updates, how many teams made it into eliminations at Worlds, or what's happening with the next events, like what off-season events are there. So that's a quick tip, a quick way for you to share, because it is similar content to what you would have, but you don't actually have to create that. You could just comment with when you're sharing it, being like, we're going to be at this, or like, we made it into the finals and all that fun stuff. And then sharing post on Instagram is There's two ways. So you can directly repost by using the reposting app onto your own feed. So it will have that little bar at the bottom saying reposted. It'll have that. It'll take their description and their images and just post it straight onto your account. Or you can just share their post to your story, which is a different type of engagement than that actual feed post. So it's just finding out what works for you and what doesn't. Is it worth reposting directly? Is it something that directly affects you? Or is it something you just want to boost on your story? And then, oop, I skipped over one. Tagging. So one rule with tagging accounts, you want to avoid tagging a personal account when you can. For multiple reasons. First off, that personal account may not want to be tagged. It also might be irrelevant to the content. So, for example, we don't usually tag students or mentors in the photos that contain them because it's not really relevant. The photo is of them, yes, but you don't want that to be pulled away from you. It is also slightly a privacy issue. There are some exceptions to this rule. Some personal accounts are directly tied to the individual if they're in that photo, such as politicians and other stuff. But the rule of thumb is you want to avoid tagging those personal accounts when you can. So in that case, when should you tag? So you should tag someone when the content connects to the account you wish to tag. So for example, you want to tag them if the person was a part of the project or is connected to the project. An example of that would be thinking about those joint outreach events with other teams. So Team Dave, the Cyber Cavs, Rebels, they all went to the aviation day at the Waterloo Airport together. We would tag them because we are all connected with the project. We were all there together. So we would usually tag them in whatever post we did, being like, hey, we were here with these and these teams. We had so much fun together. And then when it comes to how you should tag, there are a couple of different ways to go about it. So a lot of the ways, you can either tag them in the image if there is an image provided, or in the description or main body text, or both. It just depends on what the scenario is. So you should tag in the description or the main body text when the post reflects common connections. So in the case of the aviation day at Waterloo Airport, we would tag cybercabs and rebels in that description or the main body text of what our post is because they were directly connected. We had a common connection of both being there, both being invited. And then in the case of the image, we would also take them in that as well, because then they can share it. Then they'll be popping up on their feed as well. But the rule of thumb when you want to take in the images is that you want to take them if they have attended or are in the photo. And the only time you want to take them in just the image is if they have no connection to your involvement or the event. So in that case, you could be posting a season recap and you want to post a photo with another team. So we're talking about the off season, we're reposting this photo from aviation day. In that case, we're not specifically talking about that event. We are talking about something we did over the summer. We're talking about all of our summer achievements. So we wouldn't tag Cybercabs and the event is example of Team Day. We wouldn't tag Cybercabs or Rebels in that actual description or main body. We would just have them tagged in the photo. It's also similar to if you're taking a photo with a politician at the event. You may want to include the photo and you can tag them in the photo, but you don't necessarily have to tag them in the description if it doesn't pertain to what you're talking about. So it's just using that using your best judgment to figure out, is it worth it putting them in both or just one? But there's a slight difference when you want to do either. So that's it for interactions. There's a variety of ways, but those are just the two main ways we can interact. And interacting with teams or interacting with other accounts is important because it will help boost your engagement. It can gain you followers. They can start sharing your information. It's that reciprocal relationship or friendship. And it's definitely something you want to try and do. Just try to make sure you are just using your best judgment on when it actually helps you and when it does hinder you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about misinformation. So What is misinformation? Misinformation is false or inaccurate information, especially that which is deliberately intended to deceive. So when we think about misinformation, I want you to think about those COVID conspiracies, um, vaccine conspiracies, any of those big conspiracies, like the Illuminati. Well, not really the Illuminati, but it is a conspiracy. Just thinking about that, where misinformation is deliberately spread to deceive people from the truth, or to deceive people to confuse them. Um, this can also be applied to misinterpreting rules on purpose. So you get that rule, you get the game manual, and there's a slight rule, and you can either take it one way or the other, and you're choosing it to take it one way and potentially risk having the refs notice or anything like that. That could be misinformation, especially if you're also spreading that along to other people. So we don't really want to do that. So why is it important to be able to identify misinformation? Well, the first thing is it spreads easily and quickly. Through social media, it can spread like wildfire. As soon as one person hears it, they could tell another person, and it's that domino effect of it just keeps going and going. And you want to be careful of that. Additionally, it can reflect poorly on the account user, especially if this is a common occurrence for you. So it is your job, it is your responsibility as the account holder, as the account administrator, to ensure that you're putting out proper information, because if that information were to lead to a little bit of like to harm or anything like that, it could fall back on you. It doesn't make you look good, and also might make you just regret it a little bit. So we just want to make sure we're putting out the accurate information. As well, our goal as FRC teams is to educate and promote education. So we work with people, or we work to teach people about STEM and other educational things. We work as mentors to teach our students. So we should always be encouraging them to check their work, to double check everything. And therefore, we should be doing the same. If we're expecting other people to be able to do the research and make sure that they're not spreading information, we should put in that effort as well. So I'm gonna go a little bit deeper on how does misinformation actually apply to FRC. So it is our duty to make sure the information, again, we are providing is correct information. And the ways that it affects us in FRC is that so think about award submissions. So you want to be putting out the accurate information for award submissions, because if you don't, that's not really fair. If you're promoting something that, oh, we ran this event, we totally did it, but in reality, you were only one of 3 teams that helped run the event, or you're only a small contributor, or you just showed up to the event. That is misinformation, and that's not something we want because it's not fair. So in that case, ways to go about misinformation is that FIRST has actually put out those chairman definitions that you have to adhere to when you're using certain words. So that is a way to combat misinformation, because it helps even the playing field for people that used to just like slightly fudge what they used to do just to give them that upper hand. And you also want to make sure that the amount of information that you're putting out there is correct. So it can be seen as a type of misinformation, or just like the wrong kind of information, when you're putting out the dates and times for events or the reason for an event, but it's wrong. So this can hurt you because it can cause frustration to those people that did want to interact with you, that did want to be there. It also adds to less engagement for you. So it hinders you in the long run, because people were going to show up, but they got the day wrong, and then they didn't actually show up. And it's not ideal. You want to think about how awkward it is to miss a flight because you looked at the time or the day wrong. It's the same kind of feeling. You want to make sure that the event information you're putting out there is correct, and that you're also not saying that an event is going to be one thing, but it turns out to be another. You want to put out the reason for the events, the dates and times. You want it all to be accurate. And then lastly, if you want to be a team to emulate, you need to make sure that you're being ethical and trustworthy. And this should definitely be reflected in your media. If you want to be that team, you want to be that, if you want to be that team that everyone's going to look towards, they're going to be like, they're doing it right, we should be more like them. You want to reduce the amount of misinformation you're putting out there, because it's not ideal. It's kind of like the thought of gracious professionalism. So you want to incorporate that in everything that you do. Gracious professionalism is super important, and it applies to so many things. So, what's some types of research that you can do for social media? So, when it comes to misinformation for social media, and how to combat it, the research you can think of it as research for school assignment. You want to check the sources. So, there are two types of research. So, there's in-depth research and there's basic research. I talked about this a little bit in the marketing workshops, but in-depth research is actually that more intense. So you're really looking at the sources of that. You're looking where they're connected to. Um, and then the basic is when you're just doing that like quick check to see if something's wrong, um, just like clicking on the link that you're going to share and just taking a look through. So some tips for research for social media. When it comes to sharing something, if you see something, you want to check the account. Is the account, or if you're about to share someone else's information, you want to check the account. Are they actually a reputable source? What's their handle? Is it a personal account? Is it a company? Is it an organization? Have they posted things about this before? Just double check all that information, because if it turns out to be a personal account, it's depending on who they are. If they're just some unknown stranger, chances are a little bit more likely that their sources might not be accurate. But if it's a company or an organization, it has a little bit higher likelihood of being that accurate information that you want to be sharing. And then you also want to check all the images in the post. So if you see something shared in a story, only one of the images is actually shown. So you want to open up that post, scroll through all the images, because it might actually happen, and it has in the past, that there is a bibliography at the end with their sources, which is awesome. It means that they're sourcing their material, which it adds to the ability that it is truthworthy, it is not misinformation. And then you also want to be aware of the conversations surrounding this topic. Are they positive or negative? Is this also a conversation that you have a place or an obligation to be about? Do you have any obligations to be careful about the topic? This does also apply to misinformation, because if you decide to share something that turns out to not be true, but it's not something that you should have been conversing about or talking about in general, it just looks double as bad on you. And then when it comes to research for your own social media, that is where the school assignment and the more in-depth looks goes into play. You want to be checking your sources. You want to be seeing if that information is across multiple sources or just that one. As Wikipedia has gotten better, but you don't always want to trust Wikipedia as your sole source. You want to go deep into their sources, and just be very careful with that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about social media privacy. So this is very important because due to the nature of FRC teams and its interactions with minors, we do have to keep in mind some privacy laws. As such, here are some rules that we recommend for safety. So first off, when you are using photos with teens, make sure to have their consent. Not everyone wants their photos to be put up on social media. Not everyone wants their photos to be shared out in the open. So you want to have those conversations, especially if it's a solo shot of a student or a mentor. You just want to get their consent to make sure that you are allowed to put that out there. So in some cases, you get the initial consent with if you put in that consent letter. There's a consent and release that some school boards have or FIRST has, or you can create your own and put it in the student package that you give to the kids to sign. That is good for a blanket where, like, if it's a group shot, they've consented to it and it's fine. But for those individual photos, you just always want to make sure that you have that consent. And then again, regardless of age, you do not want to put an individual's full name anywhere in the post. This strictly applies to students as they are under 18 plus, but it also can apply to those mentors, other volunteers, teachers. You don't want to put that entire information because first off, they might not want people to be finding their private social media accounts. They might not want people to be looking them up. So unless you have their consent to do so, do not put their full name. Nicknames are okay, but usually the format is your first name and then the first initial. And then please always keep in mind that FIRST has its own privacy rules as well. And there also might be privacy rules and laws set in place by your school board or your team. So you do, like I mentioned before, is the consent and release forms. So just always keep that in mind whenever you're doing anything that involves sharing a photo with people, because you want to be on the safe side. You don't want to be have a parent coming after you in a couple of weeks being like, we didn't say that this was okay. This is totally something we're not agreeing with. Take it down, because then it's just a little awkward. So yeah, that is it for social media and interactions and misinformation. I hope I gave you guys an accurate look at what the two are, specifically with misinformation. So thank you guys so much for coming to all of our social media series. Next up, so starting next week, there will be prep for post-secondary. So this is perfect for those new grads. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Barb. Perfect.